My name is Calliope Shaw. I'm 38 years old and I live in Richmond, Virginia. Most people who know me would probably describe me as jaded, pragmatic, and maybe a little calculating. They wouldn't be entirely wrong. Life has a way of sanding down your idealism, leaving behind a harder, more functional core. You learn to see things not as they should be, but as they are, and you work with that reality. It's a necessary skill when you've had to build a life from the wreckage someone else left behind. Years ago, I was involved with a man named Jake. He was charming in that slippery, unreliable way that fools you into thinking charisma is substance. We had a child together, a beautiful, bright little boy. I thought foolishly that having a child would ground him, would make him step up. It didn't. The moment the reality of fatherhood hit him, the responsibility, the sheer, unyielding neediness of a tiny human, he was gone. He vanished as completely as if he dissolved into the humid Virginia air. No calls, no visits, barely a flicker of financial support. Just absence. Raising my son alone was a brutal, exhausting marathon. Every late bill, every missed doctor's appointment because I couldn't get time off work, every tear my son cried asking where his daddy was, it all chipped away at me. I became harder, yes, but also stronger. I learned to rely only on myself. I learned that some promises are made of air and some people are built of nothing but avoidance. That experience shaped me, molded me into the woman I am today. It planted a seed of deep-seated resentment, a quiet fury that simmered beneath the surface of my pragmatic exterior. I wanted him to understand, truly understand, the cost of his actions, not just the financial cost but the human one, the gaping hole he left behind. Time passed. My son grew. I built a stable, if demanding, life for us. I heard whispers about Jake now and then through mutual, often exasperated acquaintances. He was still doing what he did best, leaving messes behind. I heard he'd gone on to get other women pregnant, leaving them just as he'd left me. It was infuriating but not surprising. People like Jake don't change unless something forces them to, and nothing ever seemed to force him then. A few years ago, I heard about this situation. Another woman, another child, and the familiar story of Jake's abandonment. The details trickled down to me: the pregnancy, his immediate departure upon hearing it was a girl, his swift move to impregnate 2 other women and have boys. It was a sickeningly familiar pattern, but this time something was different. This time I wasn't just a victim nursing my own wounds. This time I saw an opportunity. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. I learned that Jake's mother, a woman I'd clashed with myself years ago over Jake's disappearing act, was involved, and she, along with the mother of one of his other boys, that was me, though they didn't know I was actively engaged, were questioning the paternity of this new child. It was spiteful, yes, a petty way to hurt the woman Jake had briefly favored over someone else. But for me, it was a thread I could subtly tug on. I remember hearing about the arguments over the paternity test. The mother insisting on doing it through court, likely hoping the formality and official nature would force Jake to confront his responsibilities, maybe even fearing he'd disappear again if she made it too easy. 2 years they went back and forth. 2 years of this poor woman dealing with the uncertainty and the stress, all because Jake couldn't simply be a man and face up to the consequences of his choices. It mirrored my own fight, my own desperate attempts to get him to acknowledge his son, his financial obligations. The same weaponized incompetence, the same evasiveness. I didn't approach the mother directly at first. That wasn't my style. Direct confrontation is messy, unpredictable. I preferred the shadows, the quiet manipulation of circumstances. I had a history with Jake's family, with his mother. I knew how to plant seeds of doubt, how to subtly reinforce negative perceptions. I let it be known, through carefully chosen words to distant contacts, that I had never had any doubt about my son's paternity, that Jake was simply a coward who ran from responsibility. I let the idea fester that if my child was his, then this child was undoubtedly his too, and his reluctance to test was proof of his guilt, not just about paternity, but about being a father. When the mother, finally exhausted, agreed to an online DNA test, I wasn't surprised by the outcome. Of course, the child was his. The world isn't usually so kind as to let men like Jake escape the biological reality of their actions. But the test result, while confirming the truth, didn't magically transform Jake. It just gave him a new tool for evasion, weaponized incompetence. He knew the child was his, legally proven, but suddenly he was incapable of understanding what that meant. He couldn't figure out child support forms, couldn't manage visitations, couldn't grasp the concept of providing for a child's needs. It was a performance, a pathetic display of a man utterly unwilling to inconvenience himself for the sake of his offspring, and so, just like with me years before, they went without speaking for another 2 years. He vanished again, not physically from the state this time, but emotionally and financially. He moved, I heard. Several states away, making the pursuit of child support even more complicated, another obstacle course for this woman to navigate alone. My blood boiled, a cold, slow burn. It was my story all over again, playing out in real time, inflicted on someone else, on another innocent child. But this time I had perspective. I had the distance of years and the hard-won knowledge of Jake's character. I also had the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my subtle prodding in the early days had helped push the paternity issue to a head, ensuring that at least that fact was undeniable. It was a small win, but it cemented my resolve. This time he wouldn't just disappear and leave someone else to clean up his mess. This time he would face a reckoning. I watched from the periphery. I heard about the man this mother met, Gary. A decent man, reliable, supportive, everything Jake wasn't. I heard that the mother, tired of fighting a ghost, tired of the uncertainty, had asked Gary to do something extraordinary, sign the child's birth certificate, to legally become the father. When I heard Gary had agreed after careful consideration, a cold knot in my stomach loosened. This was significant. Legally, Jake was being replaced. This wasn't just about child support anymore. This was about identity, about the very concept of fatherhood. This was the consequence of Jake's deliberate absence. His abdication of responsibility had created a vacuum, and a better man had stepped in to fill it. A pragmatic move on the mother's part, absolutely. A necessary one, but I saw it as something more. I saw it as Jake forfeiting his claim piece by piece through his own negligence, and I started to see how I could use that, how his own actions, amplified and directed, could become the instrument of his downfall. My calculations were beginning then. Unpredictably, Jake returned. Just like he'd vanished, he just reappeared, wanting to be a father again, he claimed. After years of silence, years of active evasion, it was audacity, pure and simple. He expected to waltz back in and pick up where he left off. Consequences be damned. That's how men like him operate. They think their presence is a gift, erasing years of neglect with a simple declaration of intent. The mother, to her credit, was transparent with the child. She explained the situation: 2 fathers, one biological, one the man who had actually been there. This conversation, relayed to me through my network, fascinated me. It was a test of loyalties, yes, but also a test of perception. Who was the real father in the eyes of the child? The child's decision, when I heard it, brought a grim smile to my face. She wanted to call Gary Dad. Jake, the biological father, the man who had sired her, she would call JJ. It was a small victory, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, but it was deeply significant. It was the child herself assigning the title, the weight of dad, to the man who had earned it, not the man who merely claimed the biological connection after years of absence. It was a direct consequence of Jake's choices, a natural, heartbreaking outcome of his neglect. And it was leverage. Jake's attempts to reintegrate were predictably half-hearted and fleeting. He always found a reason to leave again. The most recent departure, the one that truly solidified my plan, was because the mother had done the only sensible thing. She'd asked him to take full custody. If he wanted to be a father truly, madly, deeply, then here was his chance. Provide a stable home, be present, be the parent. His reaction? Pure, unadulterated fear and paranoia. He claimed he was worried she'd report him for kidnapping if he took the child. A ridiculous, baseless fear, a transparent excuse to run from responsibility yet again. He said he'd talk to the child when she turned 18. 18, another decade and a half of absence. Another child abandoned until they were an adult and couldn't inconvenience him anymore. This confirmed it. He wasn't just neglectful, he was constitutionally incapable of being a father in any meaningful sense. He was a liability, a source of instability and pain for any child unlucky enough to be his. He needed to be stopped, or at least neutralized. Permanently, this latest vanishing act was the catalyst. It pushed me from subtle manipulation to active orchestration. My own jaded pragmatism kicked in. What was the most effective way to neutralize a man like Jake, who valued only his own comfort and freedom from responsibility? You didn't appeal to his conscience, he didn't have one. You didn't shame him, he was immune. You had to hit him where it hurt the most. You had to make the consequences of his actions so undeniable, so ingrained in the legal and emotional fabric of the child's life that he could never wiggle free again, and ideally that it cost him something significant. Financial ruin would be poetic, legal entanglement even better, but stripping away his already tenuous connection to the child felt like the most potent form of psychological warfare. I began watching more closely, not just listening to gossip but actively seeking information. I knew the child's school, her routine, the mother's life. I understood the dynamics. Gary was the rock, the constant. Jake was the intermittent disruption, the confusing JJ. My plan started to form, piece by agonizing piece, built on Jake's predictable patterns and the existing reality forged by Gary's presence. It was a long game, intricate and requiring patience, but my motivation was clear. Ensure Jake finally paid a price for the trail of abandoned children he left behind, starting with mine, leveraging this situation as the perfect opportunity. The first step was subtle. I needed to reinforce the child's perception of Gary as dad and Jake as something else, something distant, less important, maybe even a little strange. I couldn't directly interact with the child, of course. But I could influence the periphery. I discovered, through casual conversation with someone who lived near the mother, that she occasionally needed help with transport, daycare pickups, errands. She'd hired various people over time. This was the thread I needed. I found a man, a freelancer who did odd jobs, trustworthy and reliable. I offered him a small sum, significantly more than he'd usually get for a few hours of transport work. His task was simple: be helpful, be kind to the child, and introduce himself by his first name. His name was David. I arranged for him to be available when I knew the mother was struggling for childcare coverage. A simple transaction seemingly unrelated to Jake but absolutely crucial to my plan. David provided the transport for a few weeks, always friendly, always present. The child, comfortable with the routine, the reliability, learned his name, David. A simple name, a placeholder for reliability and presence, the very things Jake lacked. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Jake. His attempts to contact the mother were sporadic, often via text, demanding access or declaring his renewed interest, always followed by another ghosting act when confronted with actual parenting expectations. It was infuriating to witness his casual cruelty, but each instance fueled my resolve. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. He was digging his own grave, and I was simply providing the shovel. The core of my plan revolved around Jake's brief performative returns. They were always over the phone, never in person unless absolutely necessary. He preferred the safety of distance, the ability to hang up or not respond when things got difficult. My goal was to make one of these calls devastatingly effective. I needed to ensure the child's perception of him, the reality shaped by his absence and Gary's presence, landed squarely on him, undeniable and public. I monitored the mother's social media, her public posts, looking for patterns, for hints of when Jake might surface. I also cultivated a casual acquaintance with someone who was tangentially connected to Jake's family, someone who enjoyed gossip. Through careful questioning, I learned that Jake often called late in the evening, when he assumed the mother was tired or distracted. He'd use text first, a feeler, then sometimes follow up with a call. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I learned the child had got her own phone. A simple thing, a smartphone for a young kid, but it opened up a direct channel. It meant the child could potentially receive or make calls without the mother necessarily being the gatekeeper every single time. This was the vulnerability I needed. I waited. I watched. I saw the text come through to the mother's publicly visible number, a vague message from Jake, something about wanting to talk to the child. The mother, likely weary of the endless back and forth, but perhaps also wanting the child to have the chance to talk to her biological father on her own terms, gave the child the phone. This was it. The moment I had been orchestrating subtly for months, even years, without the mother ever knowing the extent of my involvement. My heart hammered not with fear but with a cold, focused anticipation. I had done everything I could to set the stage. I had reinforced the stability Gary represented, introduced the concept of David as a helpful, present figure, and waited for Jake to make his predictable, fleeting reappearance. I knew the child had the phone. I knew Jake was likely on the other end, and I knew what I hoped would happen, what his years of absence and the presence of other men had likely instilled in the child's young mind. I made sure I was in a position to overhear, a nearby room, the door slightly ajar, pretending to be busy with something else. I heard the child's voice, hesitant at first, then more comfortable. I heard Jake's voice, sounding overly casual, trying too hard, and then I heard it. The words that were the culmination of his neglect, the direct consequence of his absence, the living embodiment of his abdicated role. "Oh, hello, JJ," the child said, her voice bright and innocent. My lips curved into a thin, grim smile. JJ, the title she had chosen, stripping him of the earned respect embedded in Dad. They talked for a few minutes. Jake asked generic questions, awkward, stilted attempts at connection. He sounded like a distant uncle, not a father. And then the words I had waited for, the proof that his place had been filled, that his name had become interchangeable with other helpful, transient figures in her life. "David told me about that," the child exclaimed, talking about something mundane, something related to school or a recent outing. "My dad," she continued, referring to Gary, "says we can go there next week." There was a pause on Jake's end, a long, uncomfortable silence. I held my breath. Would he correct her? Would he insist on his title? Would he try to assert his biological claim? He didn't. He let it hang in the air. He heard the child refer to another man, Gary, as Dad. He heard her refer to him, the man who gave her life, as JJ. And he heard her mention David, a man who had provided simple, paid transport, a name that seemed to hold more recent, tangible relevance for her than his own. He didn't correct her. He just let her call him David. He just let her talk about her dad, Gary, to him. A strange mix of emotions washed over me. A part of me, the small, buried part that still remembered the hope I'd felt when I was pregnant, the part that grieved for the father my own son never had, felt a pang of something akin to pity. It must be a bitter pill to swallow, hearing your own child call another man dad and mistake your name for a temporary driver. But the larger, more dominant part of me, the calliope forged in the fire of abandonment and financial hardship, the pragmatic, calculating woman who had spent years navigating the world Jake had forced upon her, felt a profound, icy satisfaction. He didn't correct her because, on some level, he knew he had no right to. He had forfeited that right through years of deliberate neglect. He had allowed other men, Gary, the father figure, David, the helpful presence, to fill the void he had created. His child knew his proper name and title if he had acted like a father, but he hadn't, and this was the consequence. My plan hadn't been about inflicting physical pain or financial ruin in a single dramatic blow. It was more insidious, more deeply cutting. It was about ensuring that the most basic connection, the bond between father and child, was irrevocably altered, defined not by biology but by presence and love. It was about making him confront the living, breathing result of his choices every time he heard his child call another man dad, or confused him with a stranger who had shown her simple kindness. The conversation ended shortly after. Jake, likely unsettled, found a quick excuse to hang up. He retreated back into the ether, wounded not by external force but by the simple, innocent words of the child he had abandoned. The aftermath was quiet, outwardly unremarkable. The mother likely didn't dwell on the details of the conversation beyond the child's charming confusion. Gary remained the constant, the reliable dad, but for Jake I knew that moment would linger. It was proof, undeniable proof, that his absence had cost him everything that truly mattered. My role in this specific exchange was minimal, simply ensuring David was a presence, ensuring I was there to overhear. But it was the capstone on years of quiet observation, of understanding Jake's patterns, of recognizing the opportunity when it arose, and of subtly, patiently influencing the environment around him. I hadn't forced the child to call him David or to call Gary dad. I had simply allowed the natural consequences of Jake's own actions to unfold, perhaps nudging the dominoes just enough to ensure they fell precisely where they would hurt him the most. His own neglect was the weapon, the child's honest perception was the trigger. My motivation wasn't about getting revenge for this specific mother, though I sympathized deeply. It was about getting revenge for my own child, for the years of struggle I endured, for the gaping hole Jake left in our lives. This situation this child Jake had also abandoned provided the perfect stage. By facilitating the outcome where he heard the undeniable proof of his irrelevance, I felt a sense of justice, cold and hard-edged, for all the children he had left behind. There were other consequences too, set in motion long ago through subtle reporting and carefully timed information shared with the right people. Child support arrears don't just disappear, especially not when someone is quietly ensuring the paperwork follows you across state lines. His fear of being reported for kidnapping was ludicrous, but my ensuring that his location was trackable, that his inconsistent contact was documented, meant that if he ever did try anything drastic, the legal system would be ready. His life, his freedom, his finances, they were now tied, however reluctantly, to the children he had tried to abandon. Watching from a distance, I saw Jake's life become more complicated. Legal notices arrived, wage garnishments were discussed. The consequences of his past actions, amplified by my quiet efforts, were catching up to him. He couldn't just disappear anymore. There was a paper trail, a legal claim, and the undeniable reality that his own daughter barely knew his name and saw another man as her father. Did I feel good about it? It wasn't the triumphant, joyful feeling I might have imagined in my angrier moments years ago. It was more complete, a sense of balance restored, however grimly. My own jaded perspective remained intact. Revenge doesn't erase the past, doesn't heal the wounds, but it can prevent the perpetrator from escaping the consequences. It can ensure they finally face the reality they inflicted on others. My son is grown now. He knows about his father, the ghost who comes and goes. It's a complex relationship, or lack thereof, but he has a mother who was always there, who fought and struggled and provided, and he has learned by watching that reliability and presence are the true measures of a person. As for me, Calliope Shaw, I'm still in Richmond, still pragmatic, still calculating when I need to be. Life continues, messy and unpredictable. But the weight of that particular injustice, the one Jake inflicted on me and my son, feels lighter now that I know he has finally, undeniably faced a consequence that strikes at the core of his pathetic attempts to escape responsibility. He is JJ, the biological stranger, the man whose own daughter doesn't know his name while another man is dad. It's a fitting legacy for a man built on absence. And that is the story of how sometimes the most effective revenge isn't loud and dramatic, but quiet, patient, and built entirely on the target's own failures. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.